Now, one person who always makes drafting easy, it's our good friend from the score, Justin Boone. Look at this handsome devil. The goatee is really growing in nicely here. It's the full beard. Wait, it was taken down so much on the sides. I thought it was just a goatee. We got the side profile. Boone, I can only assume you were inspired by Daniel Jones. And he's on mute. What a rip-roaring start. This is live, everybody. This is the way we do it. So we're going to get Boone in a second. But today in this segment here with Justin Boone, if he is back, is he back?
Are we good now, gentlemen?
Oh, we're good now.
There we go.
There we are.
In all honesty, there's really very little response to,
Well, I was sitting in the background for a few minutes there watching you guys talk to Jake. I miss my buddy Jake. I got to get him on my show pretty soon. Love what you guys were saying. Great work as always. And you're getting like a slightly subdued version of me today. I went to a concert last night, woke up at 6 a.m. this morning, finished up my takeaways article for the weekend, did a podcast of my own. So we're getting to that late afternoon, like dip. Might need a second coffee pretty soon.
Oh, was it Bluey Live? Like, what was the concert?
It was Childish Gambino, actually.
Childish Gambino. Look at you. Very nice.
Bluey Live would slap, by the way. Okay, don't talk down about that. Okay.
All right, let's get into the running back conversation here with Justin Boone, because every year we're always looking for players that can outperform their ADP. And Boone, one of the toughest things now is to sort of carve out those names at the running back position, especially with all these committees going on, all this uncertainty in so many backfields of guys that could really make that leap. Because when you have those guys that can go from RB2s or even 3s to 1s, that's league-changing, game-winning stuff. And vice versa. The guys that we draft as 1s, like Austin Eckler last year, and by we, I mean Derek Brown, not me, never, it ends up becoming a guy that really kills your fantasy. I'm kidding, Derek and I don't think either of us drafted Eckler last year. But Boone, let's talk about some of your guys here. And let's start with one from your board that you are believing in. It's Tyjae Spears. Now, Debro has been telling me follow the money in Tony Pollard, but you have a different take on this Titans backfield. Let's talk about it.
Well, I thought everybody loved Tyjae Spears. I didn't even think it was going to be like a difficult case to make here. And it's not that I dislike Tony Pollard. It's just that both guys are going in a range where there's almost no risk in taking them. And in Scott Fishbowl, I took them both. Just let's see what happens, right? I'll take both those shots in like the 8th, 9th round, depending where you can get them. Spears, to me, last year, he shows up. And one of the biggest things I'm looking for, like this time of year, preseason, a rookie arrives. Does he look like he belongs? Does he look like he can actually be a playmaker? And Tyjae Spears showed up last year and immediately looked like that. Plays next to a future Hall of Famer and Derrick Henry, has 838 yards from scrimmage, has 52 receptions, 3 touchdowns, and does that next to Henry. Now they bring in Pollard. And let's face it, Tony Pollard, his best days came when he was in a committee. I think the Titans know that because all offseason long, they've been talking about these two guys being interchangeable. They're going to use them both. They've suggested that it's even potentially going to be a hot hand scenario. I like my odds with Tyjae Spears in that. There will be weeks where both guys could potentially deliver, but I really like Spears' chances based on what we've seen so far with him coming through for you this year and giving you RB3 flex numbers and potentially these like spiked weeks. And then, of course, if something happens to Pollard, and Pollard has been banged up in the past, then boom, Spears goes off. And that's probably the easiest scenario for him to reach RB1 numbers. But you also look at this Titans offense. I don't think people are talking about it enough. Like the changes that they've made. You have Brian Callahan come over from Cincinnati. He brings his dad, who's one of the best offensive line coaches in the league. They keep investing in this offensive line in the draft and free agency. This Titans offense is going to be a lot different this year. They're going to throw a lot more. And like I mentioned, Spears last year, very involved in the passing game. So I think there's a lot of ways that he could pay off. And the fact that he's going so cheap right now, there's just no risk at all in taking him.
Question for you, because you mentioned you took the entire backfield. Is the Titans backfield the highest one on your trough in terms of, if I'm going to invest in one and try to play it out, the style in which they might play? You mentioned, potential injury to one would mean a huge workload for somebody else. They're just one of them. Is that like the biggest one that you would circle, or are there a few other of those backfield tandems that you think have value to actually draft the entire backfield besides Tennessee?
There are a few. I mean, I'd be willing to do that with the Bengals as well, but Tennessee is certainly top of that list for me.
All right. Debro, I want to talk to you about Spears for a second, because you've been a big Tony Pollard supporter, which makes sense in the fact of when you follow the money, typically that's where guys are going. At least the early consensus is somebody who gets paid is probably going to get the football more often than not. But I kind of agree with Boone to a certain extent too. Like Spears was the guy that kind of popped for me last year. I thought he was the reason why they let Derrick Henry go. I was surprised about the Tony Pollard addition.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think this backfield shakes out? And do you see Spears as a value of, a guy who could jump from an RB3 to an RB1 in Tennessee this year in fantasy?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I love both these guys. I want to be at consensus or above on both of them, and this just comes down to talent, guys. And like the reason I have Pollard above Spears right now is because I think if we're kind of parsing through who is more likely to get the red zone work, I kind of lean Pollard. But if you were to tell me at the end, if we flipped over the cards at the end of the year and said Spears crushed and he was the lead back and it wasn't Pollard in this offense, I wouldn't be surprised at all. So I really want to take shots on both of these guys. And really, if one of these guys goes down, I think it's going to be basically a straight up committee. Like, I think they're going to be used interchangeably. But if one of these guys goes down, that's what we're talking about. One of them, including Tyjae Spears, could be an easy RB1 because we just saw this last year, man. Like, you want to talk about efficiency. You want to talk about split backfields. Like, can we not also say that, and I know this very, very different offensive environment. So I'm not going to label it as being exactly the same. But isn't Tyjae Spears kind of an arbitrage play off of Devon Achane? Like, they're not different players. They're immensely efficient. And we just want to talk about, okay, but then if Tennessee outpaces our expectations as far as being a good offense, then this is not a crazy take.
I'll say too, I think when Spears came out, there was like talk about, the lack of an ACL and all that stuff. And oh my God, like the medical concerns. And I think that talks more about his longevity in the NFL. I think that could come into play a few years down the road and maybe shorten his career. But right now, if we're just looking at 2024, I'm not really concerned about that. So I think if the public perception is factoring that in, that could also be involved in this.
Well, a guy that has a new ACL, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. Look at that transition. That's a professional right there. Javonte Williams, a guy that I think it feels like he's in no man's land right now in terms of draft capital. D-Bro, he's on your list as one of these guys. Now, I know Jaleel McLaughlin's a guy that you've targeted a lot late in draft, so I was kind of surprised when you put Javonte on this list today. But I get it in the sense that you've seen flashes from Javonte Williams in his NFL career where he looked like an explosive fantasy back. Last year, he did not look like that, and unfortunately, things just dragged a little bit because of that return from injury. Why will 2024 be different for Javonte Williams potentially now?
I understand his inclusion here. People have heard me squawk about Jaleel McLaughlin since January, so they could be like, what are you doing? Is this a total 180? No, it's not. Now, my biggest concerns about Javonte Williams was, what were we going to hear coming out of training camp? What were we going to hear Sean Payton talk about? Because a lot of the early love was all for McLaughlin and both his work ethic, the talent, his role in the offense. But if we're talking about if one player could take over that entire backfield and be the clear like 70% guy, it would be Javonte Williams. And all the camp buzz has been amazing. His training camp, like when we've seen him in the preseason, he has looked extremely good. So for a player that we were all hoping for the breakout to come, and we've seen bad usage. Yes, I'm staring at you, Nathaniel Hackett, in previous seasons. This guy could take over, and if one guy does distance himself, it could be Williams. If his tackle breaking ability is all the way back to previous levels this year, yeah, he could be a guy that tilts leagues in whoever drafts him favor.
Well, I see a few thousand people watching us live right now, so let's get to some questions, and then we'll get to some more of the takes on the running back position. Let's go with Zork here, our old pal Zork. Going to be asking us every week till draft day, but who is the better 14th round keeper, Rashee Rice or Tank Dell? Justin Boone, you're our guest. So Rice or Dell, both have good quarterbacks. I know the Rashee Rice thing, people are concerned about the suspension, but it seems like we're getting to a point where maybe that's not going to be a 2024 problem, maybe 2025. If so, how do you parse those two guys?
I honestly think I would go Rice here. Like, you look at what he did last season. It took him a little while to get going. Once they started using him fully, he was a strong wide receiver too for fantasy. And now we're talking about, this suspension. Is it going to happen this year? It doesn't seem like all the talk in the offseason that it was going to be maybe half the season. There was one report kind of suggested at one point. It doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. He might not get suspended at all. It might just be a game or two. So not really worried about that. And if it does happen in 2025, again, unless he continues to do things off the field that add up, I don't think he's going to miss significant time. So I would go with Rice, but it's incredibly close.
I see you nodding your head in agreement, and I was too. Rice was it for me. Debro, why is Rice the pick for you over Tank Dell?
Because I think if you're just talking about absolute upside in what we know right now, Hollywood, I was already worried about his health walking into this season. He's already dealing with an injury. That is not even one of the problem areas that has dogged him in his entire career. So looking at a player, we saw this last year. Rashee Rice crushed down the stretch, and we need to be investing in talented second-year wide receivers, and Rashee Rice absolutely fits that bill. Not only like, and I'm very, very high on the Texans offense, but do you want to go CJ Stroud? Do you want to go Patrick Mahomes? Which quarterback do you want to invest in? I want to go Mahomes.
Look, I want to go Mahomes too, and that's an easy one. However, the other point I want to make about Rice is there is as you like to say, Debro, the range of outcomes where Rice is the guy. I mean, he does have the jump on everybody else. He has been in this offense for a year. Travis Kelce is a little older. I'm not saying Kelce is not going to be the guy, but there's a possibility where Rice becomes the guy, whereas I don't think there's a possibility Tank Dell becomes the guy. Not with Nico Collins there, not with Stephon Diggs now in town either. I think that's the tougher sell. One more quick question here. We got one from Michael Quenzel. Joey P, in what round is the latest you could draft a tight end one and redraft? That's a fun one because I have had some drafts get away from me recently in tight end, and my pivot guy has been Pat Freiermuth, where I'm like, you know what? Didn't go my way, so I'm just going to wait it out. And literally the last round or second to last round, depending on what the draft format is, I just scoop up Pat Freiermuth and I just wait to see what it's going to be. And I still believe Justin Fields will be the quarterback of the Steelers. Justin Boone, the latest you'll walk the tightrope at tight end is what?
Man, I want it to be like round 6 because I want to get one of those top 7 very badly this year. If I miss out on them, then it's Brock Bowers where he's going now in like the 8th, 9th round. He's been my target quite a bit. If I end up with Freiermuth, I like Freiermuth. I've talked him up as a sleeper too. I don't feel good about it if I end up with him. Like at that point, I feel like I might as well have Ty Conklin or anyone. So yeah, I would wait until the final round. If somehow you miss out on the top 7, you don't get any value in the next few rounds, then just wait till the very end. And you're probably going to use the waiver wire. You hope that you hit on the right guy and it is Freiermuth or Conklin or someone like that, but you're probably gonna have to lean on the waiver wire, and that's okay at that point.
Now, before we get to more of the names of RB3s that could become RB1s this year, I want to tell you, as you're watching the fest here or listening along, you should be running some draft simulations right now. Okay, so let's get in there. Let's start running draft simulations. You can relive the excitement of all the mock drafts on the shows with the mock draft simulator here at Fantasy Pros. It's fast, it's fun, it's easy, and it's a great way to get prepared for all your drafts. It just takes a few seconds. You can sync your league, and you'll be ready to knock out realistic mock drafts tailored to your league settings in at least 5 minutes. And don't forget, if you're premium, you get the draft intel, or if you've been in a league with people for a couple years, it'll draft just like the people in your league tend to, which is unbelievable. That's how I destroyed Debro in the Flex League draft. I had little Debro robots all over the place, little Jake Seeley robots, and I was able to get the best out of things because of our incredible tools at Fantasy Pros. So you can gain an edge too with tools like the pick predictor, and that'll tell you exactly what's going on. And of course, where you are in the draft, what you should do, where the pivot points are, and who's going to make it back to you. So it's the most comprehensive analysis you can get at the end of those mock drafts too from the Draft Analyzer. You can see your favorite expert opinions, and you can even back out picks as you go. If you don't like the way a roster looks, back it out and rerun a couple more mock drafts until you get it right. That way you can dominate your draft day by preparing and practicing with Mock Draft Simulator at fantasypros.com/mock, or it's so easy. Just download Fantasy Football Draft Wizard today and start drafting smarter, not harder. Go dominate. All right, Justin Boone, let's get back to some RB talk. You've got another guy on your board who is very intriguing. In fact, so intriguing, we just talked about him with Jake Seeley. So I guess great minds think alike. Everybody wants these running backs who have ACL repairs coming back. Jonathon Brooks rears his head again. Let's talk about him. So you heard Seeley's take. You heard Debro's take. Let's get a third take on Jonathon Brooks, this time from you, Justin Boone.
Yeah, this is just about delayed gratification. You have to be willing to wait a month, or it might be more than that. We'll see how long he's going to be out and how long it takes for him to eventually ramp up and take on what I think is going to be a 3-down role. And there's just not many running backs out there that have that kind of role at this point. He's in an offense that I'm very interested in. I think it's going to be a lot better. Like we're just talking about Tennessee kind of changing so much. Carolina is going to change a lot. I have a lot of faith in Dave Canales after what he did in his last 2 stops. They've invested in the offensive line. The interior of the line was one of the biggest problems that they dealt with last year. They go out and get Damian Lewis. They get Robert Hunt at the guard spots. That's certainly going to help. And Brooks, he's not an elite prospect like, a Bijan Robinson or something, but I'm pretty confident if he didn't have this ACL, I think he would have snuck up into the first round of this year's draft. Talking about the draft in April, not fantasy drafts, of course, but this guy is a smooth runner. He can make big plays when he gets back and he's healthy in the second half of the season. That's what I'm looking at if I'm drafting him. So you're going to have to go out and get somebody that's going to be able to hold the fort down until then, whether it's Jerome Ford or maybe his teammate Chuba Hubbard. If Chuba's healthy, got to keep an eye on that one because he got dinged up in practice recently. But in the second half of the season, Brooks is going to come on. We see rookies do this all the time, but it's often when they don't even have an injury. It's just the post-bye week bump. And all of a sudden at the end of the season, they're helping people win fantasy championships. I think Brooks is going to be that guy this year. He's 21 years old and just turned 21 this summer. That's going to help coming back from the injury. I'm very excited about him. And I think you're getting a discount just because he's hurt and people are worried about that. But I expected that to be the case the whole time. These guys that end up with these serious knee injuries at the end of their college careers, they're not necessarily going to be impact players in week 1, but they can be impact players in the second half of the season.
You said something very provocative there, Boone, which was you thought that he might be drafted as early as the late first round. Is that, even though he wasn't, in your opinion, an quote-unquote elite prospect, is that just because of the way the class shaped out at running back this year, in your opinion?
Partially that, but I think just talent-wise, he belonged there. And there were some reports after the draft. Now, maybe that was just, his agent or the Panthers people putting that out there, but there were some reports out there that teams would have considered him in that range.
All right, D-Bro, we already got your take on Jonathon Brooks, so I want to get your take on Jaylen Warren, another one of your favorites. Now, Warren did pick up an injury this past weekend, and I'm sure that's going to hurt his draft value just a tad. How afraid are you of that injury, and are you taking advantage perhaps of a little bit of, I guess, that tepidness in the market potentially, as people liked Warren maybe mildly and now maybe starting to fade off of him a little bit? Should they be?
They shouldn't be. I'll steal a line from Jake C earlier, and I will say we are not playing for September. We are playing for the rest of the season. And if he slips in drafts, and we know he's going to slip in drafts because of the hamstring, and the reports that came out said it's going to be a few weeks. Okay, that's fine. Take it slow with Jaylen Warren because the talent is there. I mean, the guy crushed in efficiency measures last year, and I understand Najee Harris is not going away, but if anything happens to him, Jaylen Warren is a guy we would be ranking as a high-end RB1 on a weekly basis, as well as once he's back and he's motoring along, you're going to get standalone RB2, RB3 production. I don't think people really give him enough credit last year inside of the context of that offense too. He was an RB2 or higher in 50% of his games. So we're already talking about he's at that borderline RB2, RB3 production once he's back. What happens if he takes over the majority of this backfield and it's not Najee Harris? I don't think we can rule that out, guys, because again, kind of like Tennessee, we're projecting this backfield, but we could be wrong.
Boone, what's your take on the Steelers backfield? Because this is one I think that has a lot of people in knots. They're comfortable with Najee Harris, but we know it's not really flashy. And Jaylen Warren is a guy that does have a little bit more flashiness, but now picked up an injury, so now people are starting to sour. How do you approach this backfield, or are you just running away from it potentially?
I've kind of just stayed away from it, to be honest. And it's not that I don't think the guys can return value by any means. It's that I don't feel good about my take on it. I'm not really sure which way it's going to go. And I like what D-Bro said there. And I would remind everyone, whether we're talking about Brooks or Warren or any of these guys that are hurt, when you're drafting them, remember, you have an IR spot. So don't draft a defense, don't draft a kicker, draft these guys instead, and then throw them on your IR spot when they're not going to play in week 1. And then you can go pick up your defense or your kicker, or you can go pick up another backup running back to take a shot on. But I think sometimes people get scared of the injury and then they just don't want to take the player, and they don't think about the fact that you're going to have someone else to play in that spot, and you're going to have an extra roster spot to pick up another guy. And I think that's very important when we're talking about team building.
Look at you, Justin Boone, always playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. Let's get some more questions here. If you've got questions, we've got answers. Drop them in the chat. Don't forget to like the stream too while you're here. Subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel so you can hang out with us and talk fantasy football all year long. We've got incredible live streams, more Joe and Debro live this year. I know you wanted it. You asked for it. You got it. Plus, we've got all the podcasts here. You could possibly handle the short form videos, the long form videos. It's all here for you. We are going to be your ticket to fantasy championships. Here's a question from Hardy Ward. Are you guys in on Jahmyr Gibbs, even with this injury? Boone, we'll start with you on this one.
I'm not. And to be honest, it's not even just the injury, just in that range of the draft. I really like the receivers. I tend to go with the receivers. Very high on Jonathan Taylor this year as well. So if I want to go running back, I prefer to go Taylor. I think he's got a big season coming. And that's really why. Again, not that I hate Gibbs and not even that I think the injury is going to be a serious thing that's going to hold him back this year. It's more just the other options that are available in that range.
Makes sense. Debro, real quick, your take on Gibbs too, because I know some people are getting a little panic mode.
I'm not panicking. Everything out of Detroit says that he's going to be ready to go week 1. I believe the coaching staff. Not many coaching staffs I believe in the NFL, but I do believe Dan Campbell and what he's talking about with the injury. So I'm not fading Gibbs. I haven't moved him down in my ranks at all. And again, I want to be investing in second-year players because what if Gibbs not only owns the passing downs, but he gets most of the red zone work too? I mean, he's going to be a top 5 guy this year.
All right, let's get another question here from Jamie Ross. Where do you guys rank Aaron Jones this year? D-Bro, this is a tough one because this is one of the guys that typically people were always sour on as maybe a real RB1, and every year he would deliver, and then last year happened where he didn't deliver at all, and he missed most of the season. Now he's in a new spot, but that new spot does require, I think, now that Sam Darnold's the full-time quarterback, a lot more lean on the run game. So has that moved the needle for you at all on Aaron Jones the last few weeks?
I haven't moved his rank at all, but again, I'm above what I think I'm above consensus on Aaron Jones. He is my RB14 this year. So I think he has RB1 upside. I think he can still be the guy that we've loved in fantasy for years previously. I understand the hamstring, the injury worries and stuff like that. I get Sam Darnold, but we could also talk about Aaron Jones. We've never seen him fully unleashed in terms of like splitting work with guys. I think he's going to have 70% of the work at least this year. And we haven't talked enough about, I think this offseason, how much his pass game involvement could be immense this year. Jordan Addison was not a high-end target earner last year. We don't know when TJ Hawkinson's coming back. 80 targets for Aaron Jones in that offense. It can happen, man.
Now, when Debro was going through the assessment there, Justin Boone, you made like a Robert De Niro face for a moment. It was very good, fellas. I can't really tell. Did you want to whack him for it? Or did you actually want to say he's a good earner and it's all right, he can come back and hang out down at the end of the bar?
I see the case. I have not been following. Normally, Debro and I are totally in step with a lot of our takes.
True.
I have not been taking Aaron Jones this year after pumping him up for years, loving him. Great guy, great teammate, great fantasy player. And yet this season, he's older. He's going to turn 30 later this year. Like Debro mentioned, you want to overlook the injuries, but when a running back's getting to that age and you go back and it's like every season for the last like 4 seasons or so, it's like knee, hamstring. There's like multiple injuries every single year. I worry that now he's getting up there. And when teams let go of some of these older backs, sometimes it's because they know. And the Packers have been pretty good when they've let go of older players, kind of realizing that this guy has given us everything he can, and it's only going to go downhill from here. I actually like Ty Chandler quite a bit. I think they've talked about it potentially being more of a split than what Debro's projecting there. So all of those things kind of scare me about Aaron Jones this year on top of the Sam Darnold of it all, but we don't need to get into that.
No,
I'm also a professed Ty Chandler hater, so maybe that's part of it.
Okay.
So.
And by the way, Derek, like he said, sometimes you get older, they start trying to replace you. Maybe it's time to start just for men with the beard. I don't know. Maybe a little bit of the pen.
Wow.
It's okay.
The quick turn.
Do it.
Jeez, man.
All right, let's get into one more running back here. And if you can believe it, the guys are in agreement about this one. It's Brian Robinson again, coming back for more B-Rob talk here. Justin Boone, let's get your take on this one because this is a little bit different. So in the first segment with Jake Seeley, in case you missed it, you can go back and watch. Of course, all these shows are going to be on demand too. So Jake was talking about him as a great draft day value. You're talking about him as an RB3 who could become an RB1. Take me through that path of what it looks like.
So I'm sure you guys probably already covered a lot of this stuff. I have not understood his ADP all off season long. I think it's been pretty. he's going to be the lead back in that offense. And I think maybe it's just because people see the name of Austin Eckler, and so they think Eckler signed there and he's immediately going to become the number one, or, be in a 50-50 committee. That's not what we're seeing in the preseason. That's not what the coaching staff has suggested. They've even talked up Robinson and his pass catching ability and his improvements there. I think he's still going to have a role there. I don't think he's going to cede everything in that area to Eckler. And if you go back last year, so his season kind of got derailed by injury around week 13 or so. But if you look at the first 12 weeks of the season, half PPR scoring, fantasy points per game, Brian Robinson was the RB 13 last year. And that was with worse quarterback play. I expect that Jaden Daniels is going to lift that entire offense up. So he almost did it last year for a big chunk of the season. That's not even a really small sample size. I think he's got a shot to do it. And it's his ADP is RB 34 in my ranks. He's RB 24. I bet Debo probably has him even higher. I would not be shocked at all if he's a pretty solid RB2 and a guy that could potentially flirt with RB1 stats this year.
RB 22, by the way.
Debro, ironically, is it the factor that Jaden Daniels could elevate Brian Robinson, but also be his undoing, because you could see a world where Jaden Daniels is rushing for a lot of touchdowns, and that could hurt Brian Robinson's value, especially since theoretically he's not the big passing down guy, at least to start the season. Do you see that potentially working against Brian Robinson, or do you think, no, Jaden Daniels just elevates everything altogether and all ships rise together on that tide?
That latter point. I think it's Jaden Daniels elevates the entire offense. Mm-hmm. And I've heard enough takes about people talking about Jaden Daniels being too skinny. So I don't expect Washington. I mean, look, yesterday in the preseason game, Jaden Daniels didn't slide. He goes out of bounds and he starts immediately staring at Dan Quinn saying, all right, I know. So if
yeah,
Dan
well,
Quinn's
he better
getting
know.
on him
He better figure that out, because if he doesn't figure it out fast, it's going to be a short season for him.
But to my point, though, if Dan Quinn is making faces at him about sliding and protecting himself, do we think they're going to slam him into the goal line every time? Or is that all going to be B-Rob work when we get down to the goal line?
Look at you. You got an answer for everything. Both of you do. Thank goodness you're here. Justin Boone, always great having you on. You're going to join us later in the season 2 here in draft season in August for another podcast. All the Justin Boone I can handle. Still never enough. Check out his work at The Score. And